Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. This video is the third part of my History of Christianity in China series, so I strongly recommend watching parts 1 and 2 if you haven't already, as to catch up with the timeline. Links will be provided in the description below. Thanks for watching and I hope you enjoy. (1798) Christianity in the Great Qing Empire is practiced in discretion by some 135,000 Chinese Catholics, and proselytizing is banned. A select few Catholic missionaries remain in the court, working in domains such as astronomy. Meanwhile, in London, a young Scottish man, recently converted to Protestantism, visits the British Museum. He comes across a manuscript of the New Testament, written in Chinese by Jesuit missionaries of the Age of Exploration. After suggesting to many churches and bishops to start sending translated Holy Scriptures to China, and receiving mostly negative replies, the young Robert Morrison makes his decision. He will become a missionary and convert to Protestantism the, in his own words, 350 million souls in China who have not the means of knowing Jesus Christ as a saviour. A new period for Christianity in China has dawned. The missionary Robert Morrison arrived in Macau in 1807, a city built by the Portuguese Empire on land leased by the Chinese Empire, but he soon realized his task would be of great difficulty. As resentment towards Westerners had grown in the last decades, only traders were allowed to access the mainland, besides Macau. Chinese locals were also forbidden, under penalty of death, from teaching their language to foreigners, as it was considered treason. 3 days after arriving, the Portuguese authorities expelled him from Macau, as his Protestant views clashed with the Catholic cities. Morrison had to relocate to Canton, the only port open for trade with foreigners in the Qing Empire. During the following weeks, in order to be able to communicate efficiently with the Chinese, he clandestinely studied both Cantonese and Mandarin, finding a native teacher. It is reported that his teacher carried poison with him at all times, to avoid being tortured if he was caught. In 1809, he was appointed as a translator for the British East India Trading Company, which allowed him to earn a decent wage. By 1813, he was joined by a second Protestant missionary, William Milne. They worked together on translating texts and printing books and pamphlets, employing locals to assist them with the tasks. The year after, Morrison finally converted the first Chinese person to Protestantism, a local who worked for him as a printer for his texts, named Ta Gao. The Protestant branch of Christianity was finally spreading in the Qing Empire. In 1816, Milne converted his own local teacher, who was to be a talented Christian Chinese author, Liang Fa. As Morrison had to temporarily return to England, he entrusted Liang Fa to carry on his translation works on his behalf and incited him to start converting people himself. Gradually, a tiny Protestant community began to grow in Canton. Morrison and his colleagues, after over 10 years of intense work, finally translated the whole Bible into Chinese. Contrarily to previous Catholic missionaries, who had also translated some of the Bible, he tried to make his work as accessible as possible to everyone, natives and foreign missionaries alike. The Scottish missionary was able to convert a final person before his death, one Chu Ya-ang. He was buried in 1834 in the old Protestant cemetery of Macau that had been established several years before in 1821 by the British East India Trading Company. His grave can still be visited today. About a dozen Protestant Chinese people now lived in Canton. In parallel, resentment towards Westerners and Christianity grew even stronger in the Chinese people. The Daoguang Emperor modified the previous anti-cult law established by the Jiaqing Emperor that sentenced to death the spreading of Christianity to ethnic Han and Manchu people. Openly practicing Christians were furthermore sold as slaves to Muslim leader in the Uyghur Xinjiang province. It is reported that the Daoguang Emperor heard of the Protestant activities in Canton and demanded who were the people he considered as treacherous natives who had supplied the Chinese locals with Christian books. Some Chinese Protestants were arrested and executed. In spite of all this, one last missionary was nonetheless allowed to stay in Beijing, the great capital city of the Qing Empire, the Portuguese Gaetano Pires Pereira. As he was realizing the Portuguese and other Catholic nations would no longer invest much in Christianity in the Chinese mainland, and since the Protestant community was not yet big enough, He asked the Russian Orthodox Church to take over the possessions of the church in China before his death in 1838. Orthodoxy had been introduced in the first half of the 18th century in China, and a small mission was opened in Beijing. It however served more of a translation and diplomatic center between China and the Russian Empire, with only a few dozen converts. It was therefore spared from persecution. Due to the restrictions on trade and attempts by the Qing authorities to stop opium from entering China by any means, the British launched the First Opium War that led to a crushing defeat for China. But that is a subject for another video. The Qing Empire was forced into signing the Treaty of Nanking in 1842 that forced the opening of many ports and ceded Hong Kong to the British. These events allowed Western missionaries to considerably increase their activities throughout the coastal cities that had been opened: Canton, Shanghai, Fuzhou, Xiamen, and Ningbo. Under the terms of the treaty, foreign citizens came under the authority of their own consular, as opposed to Chinese jurisdiction. Christianity would no longer be legally outlawed. The 5 coastal cities previously mentioned were to be opened for trade and residence for all foreigners, as well as the right to build churches, schools, missionary residences, etc. in these cities. All former church buildings were to be returned to the Christians, regardless of their present status. Catholicism was now publicly reaffirmed, and Protestant evangelists could now openly preach to urban populations. Keep in mind, however, that Christianity and preaching beyond the 5 cities was still banned. Hong Xiuchuan, a man who had failed at the imperial examinations 4 consecutive times, started studying Protestant pamphlets distributed by the missionaries and the text of Liang Fa, the second Chinese Protestant in history. He eventually started his own Christian sect, writing his own version of the Bible, known as the Taiping Bible, or Bible of the Great Peace. His sect grew into a movement, then an insurrection, and finally a full-scale rebellion against the Qing court in 1850. I explain these events in my videos about the Taiping Rebellion, links in the description. Meanwhile, Protestant missionaries kept flocking to China. James Hudson Taylor, a young British Protestant who had studied medicine, came to Shanghai in 1854, where the British had established a concession. Initially struggling to accomplish his task, being nicknamed the Black Devil due to his coat, he later managed to convert a few people. The Taiping Rebellion led to even more suspicions towards Christians. One French Catholic missionary named Auguste Chapdelaine joined the Catholic mission of Canton in 1852. He however decided to pursue his work further into the mainland and started preaching in Guizhou province, then Guangxi province, breaking the law. 10 days after arriving to a village, where the local Catholic community counted about 300 members, he was arrested and jailed for over 2 weeks. Regularly threatened, he did not stop his work and was arrested again in 1856. This time he was accused of stirring up unrest, and since he refused to pay a bribe to be released, he was tortured and executed. This event greatly tainted the Sino-French relations. Coincidentally with the Taiping Rebellion, the Second Opium War broke out between the Qing Empire and the British Empire that same year. The French Empire later joined the war alongside the British, prompted by complaints and demands for reparations for the death of the missionary Auguste Chapdelaine. Once again, the overrun and ill-equipped Chinese army was no match for the modernized European forces, and yet another unequal treaty was imposed on China. Missionaries were now allowed to work, own properties and travel throughout China beyond the 5 coastal cities. The Catholic Church did not make major efforts to evangelize in China, having already a significant presence, with quite a few Catholic missionaries working. On the other hand, Protestant missions from America, Britain and several European countries started to be dispatched in large numbers to the Qing Empire. It is estimated that by 1864, a couple hundred Protestant missionaries worked to convert the Chinese people. Many churches, clinics and hospitals were opened in the country, largely introducing modern medical practices into the Chinese Empire. American physician and missionary Peter Parker, who arrived in Canton in 1834, founded the following year the ophthalmic hospital, later to become the Guangzhou Boji Yiyuan, or Canton Hospital. This was the very first Western hospital opened in China, and it treated thousands of patients. It still exists today. The missionary Hudson Taylor founded the China Inland Mission in 1866, that would become the largest Christian mission in the history of China. Many diverse missions and groups sprouted throughout the country. Several native converts also gradually obtained autonomy and started their own movements, more independent from the missionaries. Inevitably, Christianity was thriving in the Qing Empire, still mainly Catholic, then Protestant, and finally a small Orthodox community. Chinese conservatives and nationalists, however, started growing more and more uneasy of the Christian influence and foreign presence in general. The elites, educated in classical Chinese values, realized that they lost a lot of influence to the Christians who engaged in charity, providing food and shelter to poor people. Many common people also felt that Christianity tainted the pure Chinese culture. During the second half of the 19th century, anti-Christian pamphlets started to circulate. In 1865, a French missionary was beaten to death in Youyang. The local viceroy was forced to pay 80,000 taels of silver in reparations to the French, who sent troops to intimidate. One local accused of the beating was executed. In 1868, in the town of Yangzhou, riots broke out after posters in the city accused the foreigners of kidnapping and killing babies to make medicine. Thousands of locals stormed the China Inland Mission and injured many missionaries, who had to flee. The British then intervened by sending 70 Royal Marines. Zheng Guofan, the local viceroy and a significant statesman and general, had to make an official apology. Zhou Han, a conservative scholar, made it his oath to fight what he perceived as a Christian invasion. His father had actually died while fighting the Taiping rebels in 1860, and he later fought in the Chinese army himself, obtaining minor titles. Christianity had thrived in his native Hunan province while he served in the army, and when he returned he started writing books and creating prints, encouraging the people to return to traditional Chinese virtues and directly denouncing the Christians. His tracts, in a direct response to the Christian ones, held titles such as Death to the Devil's Religion, Death Blow to Corrupt Doctrines, or Complete Set of Images to Ward Off Heterodoxy. Locally, a true propaganda war between the Christian and anti-Christian pamphlets began. In 1891, in what would be known as the Yangtze Riots, big crowds in several cities along the Yangtze River harassed and attacked Christians. Hundreds died, including 2 British citizens. The British consul then pressured the Chinese local authorities to track down Zhou Han, who was seen as responsible for the violence, since he printed most of the pamphlets. They, however, realized the man was perceived as a hero by many Chinese locals, and were therefore reluctant to prosecute him. Zhou Han was eventually stripped of his rank and sent back to his native town, and later jailed. While Christianity was growing stronger and stronger in the Qing Empire, as was Western influence in general, more and more anti-Christian and anti-foreign riots erupted, which often led to the local authorities having to pay reparations to the Western powers. A split in the imperial court was born between conservatives and reformists, who understood the only way for China to get its might back was to modernize and westernize, as had done the Empire of Japan. In 1895, a prefect of Caozhou recruited the Big Sword Society, one of many secret societies in China, to fight off local bandits. The bandits, however, converted to Christianity and sought refuge from missionaries. The Big Sword Societies then attacked and burned down churches. In 1897, people believed to be members of the society assassinated 2 German Catholic missionaries. The German Empire then used this event as a pretext to receive land and silver from the authorities and the right to build 3 more churches. Tensions were growing on all sides. The conservatives of the court, the reformists who urged for radical changes in the empire, the Western powers who vied for more privileges, and the Christians and anti-Christians. Signs of an imminent conflict were starting to show. At the turning point of the 19th century, Christianity in China had never been stronger. The China Inland Mission counted alone more than 500 missionaries. There were additional thousands of Protestant missionaries in the country. The number of Chinese Protestants is estimated at somewhere between 50 to 100,000. The Catholic community counted about 600 to 700,000 members, the Orthodox a few thousand. In the countryside, however, nationalist Chinese, infuriated by the spread of this foreign cult and the weakness of the authorities, started gathering in groups with a common motto: overthrow the Qing, exterminate the foreigners. It was time for yet another rebellion. Thank you for watching my video, I hope you enjoyed it. If so, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments section below.